Hello,
Hey.
once again, everybody, and welcome to the iGaming Next weekly news live. Uh, as you can see, I'm proudly displaying my Three Lions badge as England got off to a winning start in the World Cup. Connor, you didn't get the memo.
No, my England shirt's at the dry cleaners, Jake. Sorry, mate. I would have worn it. Um, it's got number 7 Beckham on the back. Is that right? Is he still captain?
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought
yeah,
so.
no, he's not. But
Nothing's
well, he's all
changed that
still
much
covered
since the.
in bits of kebab from the Euros, is it?
No, actually, I didn't clock that at the Euros. I just stayed home and drank champagne. Unfortunately, I wasn't celebrating a victory. I was commiserating a loss at that time. But no, I haven't had an England shirt since I was about 11 years of age, which personally, as a non football fan, I think should be about the upper limit for buying them. Um, but you look very fetching in yours, Jake, I must say. It really suits you.
Yeah, thank you. You really sound like you mean that, Connor.
I do, yeah.
But
I'm a very
yeah, as a
passionate football
non-football
fan.
fan, this World Cup with what is it, 4 games on a day as we've got at the moment.
Yeah.
You must be loving it.
Yeah, I really, honestly couldn't care less. It's such a shame because I think when we last had one, which was what, 2018, if it's every 4 years. I remember it. It was like the summer of love. We got to the quarterfinals, maybe semis. We got to the semis against
Semi,
Sweden. I don't know. No, I think we beat Sweden
Croatia,
in the quarters or
close enough.
something. Croatia, Sweden. Yeah, but I remember because it was summertime and because English people love football so much, everyone was so jubilant the whole time. And it seemed like there was a really positive atmosphere around. But now it's like it's winter, it's dark, it's miserable. Costa Rica lost 7-0 to Spain. I just think, oh, who cares? Who cares? But it's going on in Qatar, all that controversy. Let's not even get into that. I haven't
Yeah, you're
got
right.
into the
It
weeds of
does.
all that and looked at all the details, but it's not exactly the most prestigious tournament that it could have been, is it?
No, you're right. It does spoil a bit of the carnival atmosphere. That 2018 summer was pre-COVID as well, of course, which seems like a lifetime ago
Yeah,
now.
I know.
But yeah, Qatar has certainly taken the gloss off of it a little bit. And the 2018 one was in Russia, so that goes to show what FIFA's track record is like at the moment. I would be
Yeah.
wearing a One Love armband if I had one handy, but there we are.
I also thought that at the Euros final, the England fans just really let themselves down so much, smashing everything up. You're in like it's one thing when they go abroad and smash up other people's countries. It's like this is where you live and you're smashing it to pieces and rioting. I thought it was all a bit much. And now I don't think they deserve to win anything anyway, and I hope they lose.
Yeah, there's no argument for that kind of behaviour, is there?
No, absolutely
But
not.
obviously,
No.
I hope they win, and we've got the USA tomorrow, which will be an exciting clash before Wales on Tuesday. So,
Whoa,
um,
yes. The match is already being described as on this week.
so Connor, we're obviously freshly back from Malta, where we were last week. We
Yeah.
both went to, well, you went to Sigma, and we also got to record weekly news in the brand new studio live for the first time with Pierre. That was pretty good fun, wasn't
Yes, that was very exciting, actually. I thought that was very nice. I've thought about converting my home office here into a state of the art podcast studio just because I enjoyed it so much. So maybe in a few weeks, I'll get some soundproofing here, block out these windows, just put like concrete blocks up and then soundproof it. And then I could invite you down here and we could have our own little studio here in England.
it? Yeah, that sounds good. It feels a little bit low production value today, doesn't it, compared to last
It
week with
does,
the
yeah.
neon
Yeah, I
lights and
know.
everything.
Yes, but we'll soldier on through anyway. What have you got for us? What's been happening since you got back?
Yeah, so today, it probably won't come as a surprise to our viewers, and thank you very much for joining us, by the way, that we're going to discuss the New York Times coverage of the US sports betting sector. Um, Probably easiest to describe the coverage as unfavourable. The newspaper went live with 4 different articles this week that have kind of painted a pretty miserable picture of sports betting and the lobbying efforts in the US, and some concerns around responsible gambling, responsible gambling, sorry, as well. And it's fair to say the industry, didn't appreciate quite how it was portrayed, and we've seen that in some response on LinkedIn, as well as some official statements from the American Gaming Association. It was, I believe. What do you make of this coverage, Connor?
Yeah, like you say, I got back from Malta on Saturday and I took Monday and Tuesday off to have an extended Sigma hangover here in London. And by the time I came back to work yesterday morning, it was like all anybody could talk about was this huge New York Times expose. It's like, oh my God, so scathing. And I think it was a lot. It was a lot of reading, man. These articles were like very long and seemingly very thorough. I think if you were looking at it from some outside the industry perspective, you would think, well, this is comprehensive. In reality, I think it was all quite one-sided, and it seemed to offer some. I think it offered some pretty fair criticisms across the 4 articles. Probably there probably have been instances where legislation was rushed through as a result of lobbying efforts, in a way that's not favourable, in a way that hasn't been ideal. I think that's probably fair to say. We've gone from like 1 or 2 states having legal sports betting to 31 states having sports betting in the space of 3 or 4 years. So some of that legislation was obviously pushed through very quickly. But I think that's probably par for the course if you're introducing any new industry to a country or changing the rules in a big way like they are doing at the moment. The couple of things that I thought they really did get right, and which they did double down on, each of these things had their own standalone articles, was the betting sponsorships on college campuses thing, which I don't.
Well, just before you go any further, we're going to look at each article in a bit more detail. I'm going to have a bit more of a discussion on that. But I'm pleased to announce we've got a special guest with us this week as well. And hopefully joining us live now is Steve Ruddock from Gambling.com Group.
There he is. Hi, Steve. We can't hear you at the moment. Oh,
look at that.
Oh, there we go. How are you doing?
All right. How are we going? All right. I'm centered now. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Steve? Thanks for joining us on Thanksgiving as well, of all days.
Yeah, Thanksgiving morning. This gets me out of any other tasks I might have had to do. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, thanks for joining us. You don't need to peel the potatoes this morning. Obviously, you've had some time to, soak up these articles as well, and you've written your own piece about them. But I'm just going to start off by, for our viewers that might not have had time to kind of, immerse themselves in the coverage, because it was pretty extensive. I just thought we could do a brief run through of each article and kind of the key takeaway from each one. So I think the first one that caught people's attention was titled "Cigars, Booze, and Money: How a Lobbying Blitz Made Sports Betting Ubiquitous." So straight off the bat there, I think the NIT sort of sets its stall out. And I think the key takeaway here, it said, was gambling companies and their allies deployed a bare-knuckled lobbying campaign, showering state lawmakers with money, gifts, and visits from sports luminaries, and at times using deceptive arguments to extract generous tax breaks and other concessions. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, so isn't that how everything gets done in at least in U.S. politics? That is par for the course. I think the article did a really good job of summarizing the issues that we have with the way lobbyists have outsized influence, how billion-dollar companies have influence. A really good line I heard many years ago, probably almost a decade ago now, was, in the US anyway, this applies. Most of the gaming, the online sports betting is run through land-based casinos. Most of those casinos are either somewhere in $250 million to $5 billion properties. If you build something of that size and employ several thousand people, yeah, generally you're going to get a very good seat at the table when expanded gambling comes up. So that's why you see a lot of states are leaving out online only applicants. Only a few states have allowed that. It's because the entrenched gambling interests have a lot of power, have a lot of political clout, and they're going to get what they want. They employ thousands of people. So yeah, in general,
totally
I think the article was spot on with how that works. I think what was lacking in it is it didn't really explain very well why that's the case. And I think the case for that is lawmakers don't know about gambling. I've talked to state lawmakers, maybe one or two of them it's an issue for them. It's something they really care about. Maybe they have a casino in their district, but in general, they don't know about it. It's not something a lawmaker isn't running around going, hey, I just won $200 on betting sports this weekend. It's not something their constituents are really going to be like, wow, that's the guy for me. So I think they have to be brought up to speed. And the way they get brought up to speed is lobbyists. The lobbyists sometimes it's kind of has a negative connotation, but problem gambling groups have lobbyists. That's how in the UK, the white paper, a lot of that is lobbyists bringing these issues to people's attention. So it gets brought to their attention that way. Generally, it's their aides that end up writing the bills and kind of giving them a Cliff's Notes version of what's going on. So I don't think they broke any spectacular underlying problem with gambling. I think it's just the nature of US politics.
Yeah, for sure. Like you say, lobbying is a tried and tested method in the US to get anything kind of politically done one way or the other. And Jason Trost, who's the chief executive of Smarkets, I think the SBK app is live in Colorado. We've actually had him on this podcast before. He said a similar thing to you on Twitter. He replied and he said, I totally understand the point you guys are trying to make, but lobbying blitz is just a side effect of the way the system of American government is set up and has nothing to do with sports betting.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you guys think then that there was something slightly kind of disingenuous in that coverage by the New York Times? Of course, they know that's how politics works in the US, and they kind of presented it as if it was some huge revelation that legislation gets passed as a result of lobbying efforts, but it's sort of looked like a kind of demonization of the gambling industry in many ways. Do you think that's fair?
There's two answers to that, in my opinion, which one is you mentioned it earlier, the length of these articles and the depth and the number of people they spoke to. These probably cost the New York Times a lot of money. They flew these people around to conferences. These people are on the phone chatting with other people, using a lot of time. You have to write something. I mean, you got to write something. And then if you just take, I do this. I can't really say that I put my perspective into my columns. So my perspective is regulated gambling is better than unregulated gambling. So my point of view is always going to come across in my articles. And maybe the authors of these articles have the opposite view, that maybe regulated gambling and marketing blitzes on streaming and television isn't the best thing. So their point of view came across in the article. I don't think they really did anything nefarious in the articles. I think a lot of the points they made are good. I just think at times there needed to just be a little bit more nuance. But that's where other people come in. You don't like what they wrote? Okay, write a response to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think one of the other reasons for the perhaps negative spotlight was because their editorial team has argued that the industry's lobbying power is so strong that it's actually convincing states out of favorable agreements in their favor, so to speak. So they use Kansas as one example, which Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, think just has a 10% tax on betting revenue, and they use the example of sorry, go on.
No, they continue. I was agreeing with what you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, so they use the example of, Kansans betting 350 million in bets this fall, and the state collecting just 271,000 in taxes off the back of that. And one quote in the piece says, these states have leverage, but they are just getting outmaneuvered. That was a guy called Joe Weinart, who's the executive vice president at Spectrum Gaming Group. He said the legislators have a responsibility to the taxpayers to get the maximum amount possible, but these companies are just laughing all the way to the bank. But I should point out I think his managing director at Spectrum Gaming took to LinkedIn as one of those in criticism of the coverage and said that he was actually misquoted in this piece. So it'd be interesting to hear that initial conversation and how that developed, obviously, but we never will.
Yeah. I think they said it was an amalgamation of a couple of quotes, and maybe the person added a word in somewhere, and that can change a lot. So outmaneuvered is possibly correct. In some cases, I'm sure they are. I'm sure that lobbyists are, just filling their head with, visions of this tax revenue. But that's only true if their only goal is to collect tax revenue. So right now in the US, because of COVID policies, the federal government was basically handing a lot of money to states. I don't know how familiar you are with US budgetary matters. The federal government can do whatever it wants. It doesn't have to balance its budget. States do. States have to have a balanced budget. So a lot of times states will expanded gambling comes up when they're looking for tax revenue. It's a quick way to do it. That hasn't been the case recently because of COVID, because the federal government was basically bolstering states' coffers with money. So states weren't really in search of tax revenue. So there's a few reasons to legalize sports betting. One is tax revenue. The second one is to provide consumer protection, so to migrate customers from illegal markets to legal markets. That's another reason to do it. The third reason is if you have existing gambling in your state and it's taken a walloping from COVID, and it's, it generally what happens in the US with land-based casinos is revenue goes up for several years. It just keeps building and building as the market matures. Then it kind of starts dwindling, especially because every other state starts going, hey, they're making money. Let's open our own casinos. So you start getting a lot of cannibalization across state lines. So there's many reasons for a state to legalize sports betting, and there's many reasons for the stakeholders in the state to want them to legalize it. One of them was, hey, you can make some money here. But if your goal is to maximize tax revenue, so Pennsylvania, that was a main goal when they passed their law back in 2017, 2018. That's what they were trying to do. They're trying to balance their budget. New York was looking to maximize tax revenue. That was a huge thing for them, 51% tax rate. Other states, they were more like, hey, our existing industries, let's call them small businesses, even though they're not small businesses, want to offer this product. They want to boost their foot traffic in their casinos, increase their customer base. Here's what we do. They employ 500 people from my district. The guy next to him goes, they employ 75 people from my district. Do you want to get 75 letters? No. Well, not any letters. I keep saying that, but emails? No. So there's more than one reason to legalize sports betting. And it really depends on the state. Every state is very different in what they're trying to do. Kansas, for example, the politics in Kansas is very different from the politics in my state, Massachusetts. One is very Republican leaning, Kansas. My state is super majority Democrat. They both legalized sports betting. They both did it in different ways. The Kansas vision might be more of a libertarian point of view. People should be able to do whatever they want. The Massachusetts vision is we need to legalize this because it's happening illegally, but we also need to protect the consumer, and we need to tax it. So they get a little bit higher of a tax rate. So there's different reasons for it.
And that's probably partially why a federal sort of rollout of sports betting was never really considered, or certainly was never a realistic proposition as well.
Yeah, so in general, gambling is one of those things that is left up to the states. It doesn't have to be. We have some overarching federal laws, but they're really vague and outdated and don't apply very well to everything. But states have always had that as they control their own destiny on that front. It's up to them if they want it or not. And that's why the PASPA overturn happened, because the federal government had passed a law that prevented anybody who didn't currently offer sports betting from legalizing it in the future. So you had Nevada had sports betting, full comprehensive, and then you had 3 other states that had very minor versions of like weird parlay systems that they were allowed to continue doing. And even when they tried to expand, Delaware wanted to expand to full sports betting, the courts didn't let them because of PASPA. So the PASPA was seen as basically it was a picking winners and losers in the U.S.
Sure. Obviously, you just mentioned that you're based in Massachusetts as well, and me and Connor are sat here in England, so we try our best to comment on developments in the US. But one thing that's really interesting for me is consumer sentiment in that market. Massachusetts is obviously looking to legalize online sports betting, I think by March of next year. What are kind of the consumer attitudes towards sports betting in the States, and how do you think that could be swayed by this kind of coverage from the New York Times?
Yeah, I don't know what this coverage will do as far as moving the needle. I would say it's 10% of people might bet sports. 10% of the population is totally against it. They're just totally against gambling. And the other 80% is like, I don't care. I don't really care. So usually when they do polling, depending on the state, it will just be anywhere from 55 to 60% are in favor of it. All depends on how you phrase the question too. You can frame it in all different ways. But it's got majority support. That's why there hasn't been any political fallout from legalization. The only time it hasn't passed on a ballot referendum was recently in California, but that was for very different reasons. That was for hundreds of $millions spent on negative ads. So anywhere that it's been presented, it's been legalized by voters. So I think the consumer sentiment is pretty good. And I think anybody who is swayed by these articles already had concerns about it. I mean, some of the articles, the college betting one, to me, that's a huge problem. Most of the people in college, I shouldn't say most, I don't know the exact breakdown of the student body, but a lot of college students are not 21. So most states, you have to be 21 to gamble. So that right there presents some serious problems. And then there's all the just science that says the human brain isn't fully developed till around 25. So you're picking up bad habits when you're younger. It's not the greatest thing in the world. So that one is definitely a very good article and should be something that may cause policy changes. I don't think it'll cause a change in consumer sentiment, but I think you could see new policy changes, that the responsible gaming stuff. Those things have to happen. It's been too fast over here.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about the optics of that on the pod before, and just to kind of confirm which article we're talking about, this one was called "How Colleges and Sports Betting Companies Caesarized Campus Life," which is obviously a reference to Caesar's agreement with one of the leading universities in the US, where I think they stood to gain about 8.4 million. Caesars offered to pay them for advertising on college sports and that kind of thing. And another example of that is the University of Colorado, where basically every time somebody downloads the PointsBet gambling app, with the university's promotional code, the university pockets $30. So, yeah, they're being financially incentivized basically to push their students towards sports books. And I know, Connor, you have some feelings about this as well.
Well, but I think before you even get into the moral and ethical question and how much we should be promoting gambling to young people under 21, like, that's not even a good deal for the university. $30 for a CPA is like what the lowest acquisition costs anywhere in the US. It's outrageous. Everyone else is paying like $150 per player, aren't they? That's what I've heard. So that just seems like a complete bum deal for the university. But also, I think there's turning of the tide in some way, and I think we've spoke briefly there about consumer sentiment being generally ambivalent or positive, but as those ads continue to creep into people's lives and continue to proliferate around sporting events, and people's children are being exposed to them while they're watching NFL games on a Monday night, that consumer sentiment is probably going to begin to dip, and we'll start to see things more like what we see here in the UK. If you go on Google News and type gambling in, there aren't any very many good stories in there. It's all about really dark stuff, people whose lives are ruined or unfortunately ended by as a result of their relationship with gambling. And that's kind of what the industry looks like within the British mainstream media and has done for several years now. And it looks like it's coming to America. I think that, you know, the advertising question is a really sensitive one. And, you know, you look at markets like the Netherlands, which has only recently legalized online gambling and online sports betting as well, and they're being extremely cautious with the ways in which you can advertise and how much you can advertise. If bookies in the States are able to continue running away with that and doing whatever they want, sponsoring colleges and advertising around sporting events and all this different stuff, it could have a really negative impact on that consumer perspective, I think.
Yeah, I think the bigger problem is if they don't rein it in. So in the UK, you have one government that can crack down on it. Over here, we have 50. So one of them is going to be like, I've had enough of this, and they're going to do it. And then everyone else will need to follow suit, because most of the policies that will be put in place, people will see as good things.
Yeah, and we've predicted that the media coverage, you know, could change, because up till now, certainly since 2018, and again, you'll have to say if we're wrong on this, Steve, but a lot of it's been largely positive and favourable, and about the excitement of kind of the wheel out of sports betting legalization across these different states. And the New York Times has obviously spent a lot of money and time sort of, you know, lifting that boulder, so to speak, and saying there's more to this story than potentially meets the eye.
Yeah, and I mean, just in my conversations with the people at like Epic Risk Management, I think the U.S. has to realize that the social harms won't start showing up immediately. It's not you legalize sports betting and then all of a sudden you have a flood of calls. It's like maybe like a 4 or 5 year lag where you start really seeing the social harms of these things. There was a really good study in Massachusetts. The casinos, the regulators did a study. So basically they looked at every person who signed up through a rewards program, and they've tracked them over several years. And they put them into 3 categories, like an entertainment category, an at-risk category, and a problem gambling category. And I think the interesting thing from the study isn't how many people are in the problem gambling category. It was over the years how they shifted between those categories. So some of them, you might be a problem gambler in year 1, and then they don't show up again at all for 3 years. And then they show up as an entertainment customer. And then in that 4th year, they show up again in the at-risk. So there's all, it's not I'm a problem gambler, that's all I am, or I'm an at-risk gambler, that's all I am. There's a lot of movement between these categories. It can be life events that change it. It can be anything. So I think those social harms really won't start showing up immediately, but I think we're probably a year or 2 away from those early adopter states where the researchers will be like, hey, here, we're seeing these patterns.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about responsible gambling in the US, because one of the articles focused on that quite a lot, and that was the one about Dave Portnoy, who is the kind of how do we put this, brand ambassador for Penn Entertainment's Barstool Sportsbook operation. Through, obviously, he's the president of Barstool Sports, which was a kind of frat boy-led media community. But before that, and the headline of that article was "Desperate for Growth, Aging Casino Company," so Penn, embraced degenerate gambler. and this sort of rings back to how Dave Portnoy has self-described himself as a degenerate gambler in the past, and has even mocked, the notion of gambling responsibly. One of the paragraphs in the article says he boasts he typically wagers $25,000 a bet, and has encouraged fans to bet their house, kids, and family on a single game. And I think the biggest problem here is that, you're guilty by association if you work in sports betting when the most outspoken person is saying things like that. And that rings true in the New York Times' intro to this story. It says Dave Portnoy, who has a history of misogynistic and racist behaviour, is now a public spokesman for the sports betting industry. And I think they've gone wrong there because he's not a spokesman for the sports betting industry. There are, like you've said, hundreds of people in the sports betting industry that work solely on the promotion of responsible gambling or protecting customer funds and those kinds of things. So to kind of paint everyone with the same brush seems a little bit of a generalization in my eyes.
Yeah, so I'm not going to get into Portnoy's antics and what he does. I will say this: if you watch their sports betting show and you don't understand that it's satire, then that's on you. It'd be like watching Ali G and going, I can't believe this guy is saying that. That's the show. Like, they wear outrageous. They're basically doing a parody act of sports betting touts, right? So they're okay. Over the top.
So the context is important.
It does matter to me. I think if you're now, do I like every tweet he sends? Do I like every comment he makes? No, because sometimes it's hard to tell, and you can always fall back on this when you're doing that, oh, I'm just playing a character. This is a joke. You can always, that's a good excuse. So sometimes, I would say the line might get blurred a little bit with what he does. But in general, I think people have to understand what they're looking at. And if you don't like what he does for other reasons, you can't just automatically say, oh, his sports betting takes are what he's saying is outrageous and it's going to cause all kinds of harms. So, I mean, Penn has a really good responsible gaming. I think they're one of the only sites that has a dedicated RG channel on Twitter and things like that. So you have these characters playing their parts, but then you also have them in RG videos where they're obviously not in character anymore. And you can tell they're speaking differently. Their tone is different. Everything has changed. So I think he's an easy target. He's unapologetic. He's just has that mentality. It's easy to just dismiss it as, like you said at the beginning, you can just call it frat boy culture. But how does that reflect on the sports betting industry? I don't understand that. So, I mean, is Floyd Mayweather with his mountains of cash when he bets on a boxing match or whatever he's betting on 7 figures on, is that much different than him saying bet your house, bet your car on like what I consider more of a parody type thing? So this is a complicated one. This is super complicated. I don't think that's what you want. I don't think you want every company doing that. I think that would be horrendous. But I also think you can't just be serious. If you can say, oh, when the fun stops, you need to stop gambling. But if every message about gambling is make sure you are doing this responsibly, we don't want to harm anyone, then you're ruining your own business. It's not that. People are, I mean, if you've ever been in a sports book, you see how people act. So it is taking that behavior into your own sports betting platform. It depends. It depends on how you do it. It depends on how you manage it. And it depends on when you do cross that line, how you handle that.
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that he was an easy target. He's a gift for the person who wrote the article because he's got 20 years of material to go back over and pick things out from that sound terrible. And I kind of get where you're coming from with your perspective on it, Steve. I think a, a lot of those quotes look pretty stark when they're printed in black and white in the New York Times about telling people to bet their house and things. But it is reflective of the way that my friends and I would speak to each other in an ironic way when we're placing a bet. I've got a bet on a horse at 14-1. I'm basically printing money here. Better go and remortgage the house so I can get it in my betting account and get it on this pig that's never going to win this race. So I get that. I do think as well this is going to cause some tension and problems down the line as the world of digital marketing moves towards this influencer model. And I think, they're called influencers for a reason, because they really do have a powerful influence over the lives, consumer decisions, and so on, especially of young people. Me personally, like Drake betting tens of thousands of dollars on a roulette spin, Dave Portnoy and his huge bets, even Floyd Mayweather, as you mentioned. Yeah, all that makes me really uncomfortable, and I think that sooner or later, somewhere down the line, those relationships that are held by influencers like that with betting organizations are going to come under scrutiny in the same way as the TV ads that they run come under scrutiny, or the affiliate links that they use, etc. So I think there's something waiting in the wings to happen with all that, because it doesn't strike me as being highly responsible in its in the way that it works in some cases.
There's a sustainability element to it too. So I mean, if you let me wave my magic wand, then I'm gonna put in bet limits on everything. So that if the industry wants to say, we want you to gamble responsibly and it's for entertainment, well, why does the bet size factor into your entertainment value of it? I get it. If you're multimillionaire, then betting $100 doesn't mean anything to you. But now we've gone from betting as the entertainment to the size of the bet as the entertainment. And I think that's where it kind of gets tricky for me. So I've always said this about online poker. Like they used to say, like basically online poker was promoted through high stakes cash games and $1 million tournament purses. The average person doesn't play that, but oh yeah, we're doing this for the average poker player. That's just these 8 people over here. It's like, then we don't need that. There's no cheating scandals. There's no super users at the 50-cent dollar table. So if that's really what this is about, if it's about entertainment, then why do those stake sizes matter? If somebody wants to play 1,000, 2,000 no limit hold'em, go to a casino. You have enough money. You don't need to do it online, because then there is that one person who builds up a bit. Maybe they have $50,000 and they jump into a game way above their head and they don't know what they're doing. They have too many drinks and that's the end of it. So if you really are into responsible gambling, I think there's something to be said for those promoting of large bets, promoting of large stakes. But unfortunately, one company can't do that. So it would have to be an industry-wide thing. And I don't think we're ever going to get to that point, because 80% of the revenue comes from those types of players.
Yeah, excellent points made there, Stephen. I think you're right. Sometimes people do forget that betting primarily is about entertainment and sort of increasing the entertainment that goes alongside watching sports. Just to draw this topic to a close, the only article we haven't covered is the one titled "Why States Were Unprepared for the Sports Betting Onslaught." And one of the reporters in this byline, Rebecca Ruiz, actually came to our iGaming Next conference in New York back in March, which shows how long that their editorial team's obviously been working on these articles and these features. So anybody that says they haven't put enough thought or consideration into them, you can't really use that as a stick to beat them with. I think the key line here is probably where it says states have often turned to the gambling industry to help shape regulations and police its own compliance within them. And Steve, I know you wrote a really good piece for gambling.com, your current employers at the moment, called Three Things the New York Times Sports Betting Story Got Right and Wrong. Is there anything you wanted to say on that last article?
Yeah, it's difficult to. I don't know how they're expecting lawmakers to write gambling regulations. I mean, it's a very complicated industry. Sports betting is probably the most complicated aspect of it because it's not just, okay, let's send the slot machine out for testing. Let's make sure that the RNG is working properly and that the integrity of the machine. Sports betting is a lot more complicated than that. So there's a lot going on there. So who are you going to turn to for expert advice on what to do? You have to turn to the industry, and you have to hope that these publicly traded companies are giving you decent advice. And then you also listen to the anti-gambling crowd. You listen to them. So if you go to any state hearing where they're listening to testimony, it's not three people from the casino industry. It's three people from the casino industry, a problem gambling advocate, and then somebody else who's, maybe has nothing to do with that, and maybe law enforcement. It might be existing gambling regulators. Massachusetts leaned heavily on their cannabis regulations to try to craft marketing restrictions. They didn't actually pan out because sports betting's national, so national games would have been kind of problematic to limit in Massachusetts through advertising restrictions. But they're looking at all this evidence, they're taking it all in, and they're going, okay, here's what we definitely know we want to do. Do they get it right? No. I don't think you can get it right, because what's right to me is not right to Connor, and it's not right to you. So everybody has their own vision of what should be right. So yeah, it's easy to say these states haven't gotten things right. Yeah, they haven't. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. The temporary licenses in Colorado was one where they just re-upped temporary licenses a year later. But is that the regulator's fault? When the state lawmaker imposes okay, we have to launch by October. Okay, so what is the regulator supposed to do? Has no idea how sports betting works. They look at it and they're like, all right, so we'll just hope that Pennsylvania's regulators got it right when they issued their licenses, and we'll do temporary licenses based on other jurisdictions. And you hope that these publicly traded companies are doing what's right. For the most part, I think it's gone pretty well, considering the speed of the rollout in the US. I think there's been some serious speed bumps and people trying to get up to speed. I don't know what people want. Like if you want perfect, then we never have anything. There will be no legal gambling, because we're never going to have perfect. Nothing is perfect.
Yeah.
The self-exclusion lists aren't perfect. I know over in some European companies, when you go into a casino, you got to show them an ID. You don't have to do that over here. I know other places it's mostly cashless. Over here, it's mostly cash in a casino. So how do you do AML procedures? How do you do I know this person's on the self-exclusion list when they're just walking in the door? What am I going to do? Face identification on them? Because they don't have to show an ID. So over here, it's about like reducing friction points for customers. But then in the online space, there's these added friction points. So it's hard to say, like, what do you want? Because every time you want something, it's going to be different from what somebody else wants. And no matter what you give that person, it's never going to be enough.
Yeah, I think that was I think that was clear in the New York Times coverage. What my overwhelming feeling was like, it's very easy to criticize, isn't it? It's very easy to pick things apart and find the problems with them. There didn't seem to be much offered in by way of an alternative or a better way of doing things, or how things should be done. It was just, here's all the problems we've identified with the way it's going so far. But like I say, I think there were some fair criticisms in there and probably some less fair ones as well.
Yeah, I think it's another example of those kind of, where you see it written down in black and white. It's quite easy to evoke outrage, but the fact is that, like, this is pretty much how things work. Even in super mature markets like the UK, the gambling companies are the ones with kind of direct experience of this. And when the Gambling Commission really sort of changed its tune around 2018, where they thought we can't continue with this VIP kind of abuse, we need to have a more recreational, sustainable market. They started all these focus groups on affordability and price restrictions and everything else, but it was the operators that were leading on that. It was Sky Bet that did one, and it was GVC, as it was then, Entain as it is now, that led on another. Like, these people have the expertise, so you do have to listen to them in some respects. You can't just go with pie in the sky legislation, because then it's the consumer that suffers for the most part.
Yeah, and it would be one thing if we didn't legalize gambling, online gambling, there would be no online gambling. But that's not the case. It exists in some form, no matter what. So my perspective on this, and what I wrote in my column about it, is everyone should have the opportunity to make that choice, whether they want to use a legal, regulated market with its flaws, or if they want to use an illegal market. But when we just say, well, it's not working perfectly, so we can't legalize it, you're taking away that choice. You're taking away the choice of the legal market. Not everyone's going to pick the legal market, but they should be able to.
Yeah, definitely. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you on. It's England against the US tomorrow night. Are you going to? Have you got any plans for that, or are you like Connor and you're just going to pretend the football doesn't exist?
I'm actually a football. I'll call it soccer, because we have football over here too. I'm a fan. I've always been a fan. I went to the 1994 World Cup, a World Cup game over here. Cool. When it was in the US. South Korea versus Bolivia, 0-0.
Big fixture. Yeah. Wow, that must have been exciting.
Yeah. So it was. That's why I got those tickets and not the South
Korea. You've been a fan ever since.
Yeah, and I lived in Germany for a couple of years too, so kind of had no choice in the matter. But yeah, so I'll be watching that game for sure.
Any betting predictions?
Great. Well, thanks for joining us.
I think 4-0. Correct score, USA versus England.
I will refrain from picking that. USA has a bad track record against major teams, so we'll just see how it goes.
Fair enough.
Yeah, well, thanks again for your time, Steve. We'll let you enjoy in Thanksgiving. And for any of our audience members, you can find your stuff on gambling.com now. Is that right?
Yes, and you can follow me at Steve Ruddock on Twitter. Usually everything I write gets posted up there too.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Steve. That was interesting, wasn't it,
That was interesting, Connor. Jinx.
Have we been working together for too long?
We have. We're merging into the same person. You're going to turn up in glasses and an England shirt next week, I think.
What have we got next?
I don't think we have much more to add than that. That was a pretty solid session, and we've only got sort of 5 minutes left. So I'll probably draw a line under it there. Thank you, Connor, for joining me. Pleasure to have you as a co-host, as always. And a big thanks, obviously, to everybody who's tuned in and commented as well today. And before I go, a huge thanks as well to our sponsors, Playson, Zimpler, and Push Gaming. Just finally, if any of you watching have a news story or you know of news developing in our sector, we're always more than happy to cover it on iGaming Next. And you can get in touch with me, Connor, Sonia, and Ryan at the news@igamingnext.com email address. So yeah, please reach out if you're sitting on a hot scoop, and we'll do our best to cover it. Thanks, Connor. Say goodbye.
Right. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, enjoy the games tonight. I'm sure someone's playing someone. Zimbabwe versus Papua New Guinea or something. Sounds good
Brazil
to me. Tonight. Thanks, Jake. Oh, nice. Cool. I do like Brazil. Well, take care, Jake, and thanks for having me, mate.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.